welcome to today's episode on the Made for More podcast. This is episode 9, and we have got a very special guest again with us today. It is Justin Locker. So welcome, Justin. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. It's really good to be here.
So Justin, what I would love to know, and how we normally kick off these interviews, is tell me a little bit about where you've been, and where you're going.
Cool. Yeah. So I've been in Adelaide my whole life. I grew up in the northeastern suburbs in Windsor Gardens, to be precise. We weren't really a really well-to-do family, but we never really went without either. My parents are both blue collar, but very hard workers. So for me, when I reflect on where I came from, I came from, not the most privileged upbringing, but one where hard work was really valued and respect for hard work was really valued. So I took that all the way through high school, which was a very public high school. And as an academic kid in a very public high school, I was stuck out like a bit of a sore thumb. And so I took all that all the way through uni and ended up getting into mathematics and statistics. That was somewhere where I felt, kind of my need for organisation and proper order and exactness was really well met. And that basically led into a career at the ABS, so the Australian Bureau of Stats. I've been there now for 20 years in a variety of roles. I've really enjoyed the huge range of roles that I've had available to me at the ABS. So I've done analytical roles, programming roles, but more recently, lots of leadership roles. So team leadership, colleague leadership, and those types of things. So for me, that's where I'm going. I really love diversity and inclusion, inclusive leadership. I'm really, my mission stick is really around culture change now. So I've learned that I can have, real impact on my, the staff that I'm directly responsible for, but I'm looking to increase that sphere of influence and really push for proper cultural change. So that's my big passion now. Yeah.
That is so good. So I know that you are very passionate about inclusivity and diversity, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And of course, leadership is my jam. So I think this is going to be pretty fun, because we're going to get to cross over both inclusive leadership and see some of the magic and the work that you're doing already within your team at the Australian Bureau of Stats, and how that can really have a huge impact on the cultural changes that need to take place in this day and age. It's 2020. Let's get with it. So to kick off, I guess, can you actually just unpack for our listeners what inclusivity is to you and what it means, I guess, holistically?
Yeah, cool. So inclusion and diversity often come together when these conversations happen. And I once heard a speaker say that diversity is a fact, but inclusion is a choice. And this for me was really powerful, right? And what this quote was about was that people are all different, right? We all have different needs and different goals and different challenges, and we may be disadvantaged in different ways. So some of us are disadvantaged by being born with a disability, or Aboriginal, or gay, or female. These are all characteristics that come with societal disadvantage. But these are facts, and we can't deny that we're all different and have different requirements. And so that's diversity, right? And what this speaker went on to talk about was inclusion is the choice that we make when we deal with diversity. So, so this for me is one of my core principles, right? Is to say, well, everyone's different. So how can I, as a leader, a manager of staff, or a leader of people, make sure that their needs are met and that they feel that they've got an environment to be productive and rewarded. And so for me, separating out those two things to go, well, diversity is something I can't avoid. Diversity is not something that we can choose, but we can choose to be inclusive. And that for me is really empowering, right? And that's one of the first things I say to all of my emerging leaders, is to say, well, you can choose to make your team an inclusive one.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've all got a choice with the actions and the way that we behave in the workplace and even outside of the workplace. Absolutely. Totally. I love that. So diversity is a fact and inclusion is a choice. That is absolutely just bang on. I love it.
Absolutely.
So what actually led you to become such a strong advocate and have inclusivity and diversity be such a pillar of what it is? You've mentioned that it's your core principle.
Yeah.
What led you to recognize that this was, the way of the future?
Yeah. So I've had over a long career, I've really developed as a leader, and I started off as somebody that was, I was a statistical analyst in our statistical methodology section, right? So this is not necessarily
Sounds like
an
a real people person for sure.
well, exactly. You've absolutely picked up where I was going there, because this is not an area where we have great, studying mathematics and statistics is not always associated with great emotional intelligence, right? So,
Yeah.
so coming up through that kind of upbringing in my organisation was really interesting for me, because for me, as a fairly outgoing, extroverted person, I did buck the trend a little bit, and I was able to, as a methodologist, really relate to the people I was working with across the ABS in a way that other methodologists weren't able to. They, just simply weren't strong in that kind of people engagement area. And that was really important for me to kind of go, well, actually, I'm a bit different, but there's advantages in this, not just for me and my career, but as well for our organization.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my first, personal experience with being a bit different, and kind of feeling a bit different. But then the real turning point for me was meeting a young man who came into my team, an Aboriginal man who's also disabled, blind, legally blind and deaf for that matter. He suffers from Usher syndrome, which
Yeah,
is
right.
hearing and vision impairment, as well as being an Aboriginal man. So he
Yeah.
was really, when you're talking about challenges in life, really pushing it uphill.
Yeah.
So he taught me a lot about what it means to be disadvantaged, and he was great. He was a really productive member of our team, but that didn't mean that he hadn't overcome more challenges than a lot of other people. So that for me, him coming out and saying I'd made a huge impact on his life, a positive impact,
Mm.
had given him a workplace where he felt really productive. For me, that was really powerful.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, I can really make a difference to people and enrich their lives here. And what a privilege that is.
Yeah.
And diversity and inclusive leadership was really what kind of captured that power for me. I thought, if I can make my environment, the environment that I can control, an inclusive one,
Mm.
I have a positive impact on people. I just felt really privileged to do that. So I thought, why wouldn't I do more of this, right? It's,
Yeah.
it was a real kind of shining light moment.
Yeah, I love that so much because, as you know, I work with a lot of leaders, and the reason I'm so passionate about leadership is because we, as leaders, are in a position of influence, and you can use that for good, you can use that for evil. But what we're trying to do and cultivate and raise
Yep,
awareness throughout all industries, all sectors, all levels, is that we can
absolutely.
actually have such a positive impact on people. And I think what happens when you're in a leadership position is you're either there by title or by passion. That's usually how you end up there.
Correct.
But the impact that we have on our teams and on our team members actually filters outside of the workplace, and it can have some
Totally.
fundamental positive impacts to people around the way that they see the world, the way that they experience life,
Yeah.
purely on being a connected, empathetic, and like what you said,
Yeah.
actually recognizing that EQ is a huge part of what it means to be a leader, and really connecting and being involved in your team's life. So I think that's
Totally.
amazing, and like such a good reinforcement. So would
Yeah.
you say that working with that particular team member
Mm.
was the starting point for recognizing the impact that inclusivity had, or the choice that you had?
Absolutely. Certainly, it was the conscious point for me where I've
Yeah,
gone,
right.
oh, I can be deliberate and overt around my inclusive leadership.
Yeah,
And that is more powerful than kind of being softer about it. So I think to that point, I was still an inclusive leader, but not a deliberately inclusive leader.
yeah,
A
the
bit out
intention.
there. Yeah, you know what I mean? So kind of, I'd be the sort of guy that, people come into the team and it's, acknowledging people for their different, having a bit of banter, or, respecting if somebody's a bit quieter and those types of things. But having Ricky come in, and particularly around Indigenous disadvantage, it's not something that you can see or make tangible adjustments for, right? So if somebody's blind or vision impaired, if I'm using the correct language, they need often physical changes to the environment, a bigger screen, or more high contrasting carpet, or things like that. Sometimes they might need a bit more time to read through documents. These are all things that you can write down and define, right? But what Ricky taught me was, being an Indigenous man, there were disadvantages that he had experienced, which were generational, and you can't describe them or draw a picture for them. And for him, these were things like, his parents being disadvantaged growing up, and so him, having uncertainty or unpredictability in his life, and that leading him to not be as committed at school, for example, and those types of things. And these things, for me, working with him, I came out and acknowledged that, and challenged people that said, no, hang on, Ricky's fine, he wasn't stolen, or he wasn't persecuted by Captain Cook when he landed on our shores. So, but I'm like, no, but that's not the point. The point is, this stuff happens through generations. So he's trying to show me that invisible disadvantage exists, and it's better to talk about it and acknowledge it than it is to kind of go, well, I don't understand it, so I'm going to kind of ignore it.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Brené Brown's work. Have you heard of Brené Brown?
Vaguely, yes.
Vaguely.
Yeah.
So she talks a lot around shame and blame and all of that type of thing. And one of the lines that she says is, that movie Gremlins from the 80s?
Yeah, totally.
It was that gremlins can't live in the light. So things like shame, if you start talking about it, it can't actually live or fester, which I imagine is very similar to what you're saying with your team member there, is when you start talking and acknowledging this generational disadvantage, it sheds some light on it, but it also means that it can't kind of fester in a dark corner and be left there as an unspoken gremlin, so to speak. So that's amazing.
That's totally correct, right? And the same goes for mental health. And this is something where I'm really passionate about this at the moment. I mean, all the time, but I think there's a real gap in how we deal with mental health in the workplace, particularly in an office culture where, a huge majority of our workplace injuries are mental health related, stress related, anxiety related.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm a middle-aged white man, but I've got a lot of white privilege and gender privilege, but I also suffer from depression and anxiety, and I've lived with this for 10 or 12 years now. I've probably lived with it my whole life, but I've been treated for it for the last 10 to 12 years, and a combination of therapy and medication. And I've been really open about that. Because this is another invisible kind of barrier for people. And that, what you're saying there, Ali, is so true around if it can't live in the light. I found the more I talk about it and the more people talk about their own mental health challenges, because mental health impacts 1 in 5 people, right?
Yeah.
So it's there, and almost certain, any manager is going to come across it in their career. It's talking about it, acknowledging it. People might need a bit of extra flexibility in the workplace, or a little bit less predictable leave, or different treatment in meetings, or a different way to converse in meetings. But we don't know about it unless we talk about it and we create a safe space for it.
So how do you think, speaking on mental health, how do you think then that as a leader you would bring this up with your team? Like, would you do it as an individual thing, check in on their mental health, or as a group, or have, the traditional open door policy? It probably goes a bit more deeper than that. What would be your advice on how you actually approach mental health?
It's really tough, right? This is a really tough one because there's so much stigma around mental health. And despite all of the information that's available publicly and these wonderful advocates that we have in Australian society around promoting awareness for mental health and treatment for mental health. And just on that little segue here, I'm a huge Powderfinger fan, or I'm a huge rock fan, but Powderfinger did their One Night Lonely concert recently over YouTube, and Bernard Fanning, the lead singer, then promoted Beyond Blue right at the end of that and talked about the importance of getting help if you're feeling depressed or feeling isolated. And I just thought, wow, we've got, rock stars talking about, depression, isolation, mental health issues. So it just, despite that, things like this, it's still a bit of a taboo subject, and it's still something which is really highly personal for people.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it is difficult for people to talk about. And for me, it is one that I approach really sensitively, as I do a lot of my inclusive discussions, but mental health in particular, for me, always starts off as a one-on-one conversation. So for me, checking in with all of my staff individually, but being open about my own mental health kind of subtly invites them to divulge any issues that they might be facing themselves personally, and divulge it in an environment where they can feel safe. And from there, then I can start the conversation to say, well, what do you need? How much are you comfortable divulging this to your manager or to your team? I've had some stuff come out to entire teams and say, well, I suffer from depression and this is what it means for my performance. And I've had others saying, I don't want anybody to know about this, but here's what I need. And, it's horses for courses. So, in the cases where people come out, which I really try to encourage people to come out, but respect if they don't want to, is then, I find staff are generally really respectful of that. Where people don't want to come out, it's much harder to implement changes, but I just play the old, if I say, look, this person just needs to take, the odd flexi day or the odd, personal leave day, and in a less predictable way. If somebody goes, well, why do they need to do that in an ignorant way? I say, well, personal reasons or none of your business. And I might put an expletive in there. So that's right, exactly. But I think effectively for me is as a leader is saying, well, I support this, and you don't need to know the reasons for this, but you need to respect that that this needs to be supported.
Yes, you're setting the tone.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So for me, that's worked really well. And in fact, I think it's given other managers courage to kind of go, oh, I feel like, this person does need the day off or does need to skip this meeting for whatever reason. So I'm going to allow them to do that, and I'm going to have the courage and the confidence to say, nope, they don't need to come to this meeting, and treat them a bit differently.
Yeah, and I think that's great that you're recognizing that treating someone differently is actually an okay thing in a time where it's all equality. We need to be making sure that, yes, there's equality, but then we also need to be making sure that we're supporting people in a way that we can, so that they are able to conduct themselves in a way that is productive and also fair to them as well. So certainly having that compassion. And just on the mental health topic that we're talking about now, we'll put the Beyond Blue links and details in the show notes if anyone is feeling that they need to reach out. So thank you very much for that, Justin. I think that's fantastic that you're bringing it up with your team, and let's normalize these kind of conversations and say, here it is on the table. What do you actually need? What can I do for you? And how can we move through this together? So I think that's such an important discussion to be having, all leaders with their teams. Absolutely. If we just backtrack a little bit and go back to inclusivity or inclusion. So you mentioned that you do this as part of your own leadership, I guess, blueprint. This is who you are. This is what you're about. It's one of your core principles.
Yes.
But how do you cultivate inclusion within your team?
Yeah. And another key challenge, right? And this is kind of that in-between bit between your personal leadership and culture change. Culture change is, huge and generational and takes a long time for something to become normalized. And I think that's a really important word, right? Is normalized, not for it to be awkward, not for it to be taboo. Cultivating that within the team is the next best step after you personal leadership. So, for young leaders, new leaders coming in, you can show your personal leadership, and the next big challenge is, how do we get other people that I'm leading to eschew these same values?
Who's on the bus?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And, for me, conversations are so important with leaders, is to, chance conversations, work conversations, team conversations, is to say, this is what we're doing to support our staff. This is what I think we should be doing. Let's talk about this. Being challenged by my team, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
I've had staff come in, people working directly to me who are also leaders of people say, well, I don't think this person should be getting that. That doesn't seem right. And so, well, let's talk about it. What a great opportunity for a leader in my team that might not understand why I'm saying something as my leader. I'm like, rather than shut them down, that's the perfect opportunity to talk about it and get them on the bus. Rather than pulling them on the bus, they might end up stepping on the bus. And I've had some
Don't
real...
drive the bus while they're
No,
half on though. No.
exactly right.
Safety first.
So many ways that particular analogy could go, right? And and for me, you know, I think what's worked for me, because it's a really hard question to answer deliberately, right? There's no rule book, but I think what's worked for me is generating respect and trust with people that I'm working with directly. And
Yeah.
so when I'm passionate and communicating my beliefs and my principles on something, they're more likely to engage in that conversation and to show some humility and to show that I'm wrong. Sometimes I get it wrong. You know, I'm a big fan of, I'd prefer to get something wrong in the inclusion space with good intent than not try at all and ignore somebody, right? So, you know, I'm happy to be wrong. And I've sometimes, you know, particularly when it comes to gender diversity, it's probably where I'm least confident. And, you know, sometimes I might make a decision or I might make a statement and someone go, oh, actually, I don't think that's quite right.
Yeah.
Great, because not only am I learning, but I'm having a conversation with somebody about it and they might go away with a more open mind. So for me, it's kind of that trickle down effect. People that I supervise, I can kind of eschew these values, have these discussions, kind of gradually get them on the bus, so to speak. And then all going well, they start to have those conversations. And with those generational changes, eventually we get culture change, right? But conversations is key, you know, talking about it, challenging those discussions, being afraid to maybe say something that's a bit inappropriate, or, you know, or a little bit bigoted or biased. You know, it's okay. Like you might not. A lot of this is unconscious, right? So you might say something where you might go, "Oh, actually, I feel a bit bad about saying that." But you know what? Yeah, exactly. But you say it, and you and then you understand a bit more about why you shouldn't have said it. And yeah, that's huge.
I think there's actually a really great key lesson that you just touched on there for all emerging leaders, is that you don't need to know all of the answers. Is lesson one, probably two lessons actually. And the second one is when you get it wrong, just call it and say, you know what, I made a mistake. Whoops, I'll try again. Better, how can we fix this problem? So it's so important to know as leaders, and for any up and coming and emerging leaders, you don't need to know all of the answers. You don't need to be right 100% of the time. It is absolutely okay to make mistakes. Just own them for what they are.
Own them, exactly. And that shows that, you know, you're a person too. You know, for me, people say to me, oh, well, you know all about this. And I'm like, well, actually I don't. And if the minute I say I know all about this, is probably the minute I start becoming unconsciously biased again. Right?
Yeah, good.
Keep the open mind. You know, always be willing to learn and be corrected or be challenged on things. You know, I really love it when people come up to me after my talk and I say, actually, you know, a lot of people come up if I do a speaking engagement, say, wow, that was excellent. But occasionally I'll have somebody come up and say, well, look, I didn't really agree with that. I'm like, excellent. Why didn't you win? What's your viewpoint? And let's have that chat. And I'm always learning. And if I'm always learning, people that I'm leading see that they can always learn as well.
Yeah,
so
lead by example, and also taking into account other people's perspectives and different lenses that we have from, you know, whether it's generational or whether it's from our own childhood conditioning. We've got so many different perspectives here, and there is no right or wrong way. It is all very much unique, but being able to recognise that that's what it is, and then coming 100%. To some kind of way forward as well. So we were talking a little bit before I hit record here. You've got 3 kids. They're at home at the moment on school holidays, but, you know, you're such an advocate for inclusion in the workplace. What are you doing? You know, I'm a mum of 4, so raising decent human beings is like top of my priority list as a mother, and Alex and I have got it as such a high priority, particularly having 4 boys. How are you teaching your kids around inclusion, you know, in school, with their friends? How are you doing this?
It's and these are people that you have direct influence over, right? And I always say, you know, children are a reflection of their parents' values. So, you know, if you see another kid at school and you go, oh, they're a bit of a brat or whatever, they go, well, I don't blame the kid, right? I blame the environment in which they're being brought up. And but I tend not to judge like that, don't get me wrong. But you know, for our own kids, it was really, I mean, choice of school was really important. and we were really keen. They go to private school, and we're lucky enough where we've got incomes to support, the choice of school that our kids go to. But we sent all of our kids to inner city schools, and a key driver for that was how diverse the schools are. So being city schools, you have people come from all over Adelaide. It's not like a suburban or a parish school.
Not a zoned school.
Not a zoned school.
Yeah.
And with that comes a huge amount of diversity. And I know the principal of my daughter's school, so my daughters go to St. Aloysius College, would be more than happy for me to mention this here, is that St. Aloysius College.
Plug St. Aloysius College, yeah.
Absolutely. I have no conflict. I'm on the advisory council, but I have no conflict of interest with St. Aloysius College. But they are a fabulously diverse college, and they do a lot for school card children, and as well a lot for refugee children and immigrant children. And I mean, that's really important for my girls and for all the girls at the school, I imagine, to see that the world is built up of people that look different, behave differently, speak different, have different accents. So different cultural backgrounds, different religions. So that's has been fundamental to it. So so my daughters and my son's starting to learn this as well. Come home, they don't even recognize when people are physically different or have different backgrounds, right? It's just part of their being.
It's just who they are, and diversity is actually they're just people. And then I've had similar conversations with one of my kids. There's a Sudanese family at our school, and he was talking about one of the kids. I'm like, who are you talking about? He's like, the guy with the red shoes. And I'm like, who has got red shoes? And it finally clicked, and I was like, oh, okay. So it was just all the kids are all the same, and there's no one different. Skin color doesn't matter, and the real identifying factor was that this kid had really cool red shoes.
Yeah, that's right. Whereas for me as a kid, I might have gone, the black kid.
Yeah.
Right. And and that's and that for me, that's a really good point, right? Because that for me is a real marker that we're heading in the right direction. Is that they don't even notice.
Yeah, I can learn a lot from my kids for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing we do, and it sounds a bit cheesy, but we do try to do things with our kids that promote diversity and inclusion. So, around the dinner table, one of our rules is we don't have the TV on during dinner and no devices. Really important to have that time where we can all talk. And, we will often talk about things related to inclusivity and diversity and mental health as well. Like, I've got a young son and he's pretty angsty, and so we like to promote these discussions. But around diversity and inclusion, I'll talk about Ricky, and talk about, what he's doing. We often talk about, so my wife and I, we might watch a TV show. We watch, quite a few documentaries around this sort of stuff. And something we're watching at the moment is Filthy Rich and Homeless.
Okay.
So,
where's that streaming?
Yeah, so that's on SBS, streaming on SBS.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about that, and we actually got the kids watching a couple of episodes just to talk about, the privilege of, having a roof over our heads and food on the table. And so for us, it's actually just having those conversations and explicitly telling our kids these are values that we accept, and that these are things that are important to us as parents, and these are why they're important, and these are, and hopefully our kids, which they are, they take those values as well. And my elder, she will go to school and say, oh, my dad, went and spoke at this thing, and they were talking about this, and it's great, because then the teachers will have a conversation with me, and so they're like sponges, right? So for me, it's quite an easy target, because you can tell them, well, this is what's really important, and those types of things. But for our kids, it really is just telling them, or instilling in them that kindness is all that matters. So long as their actions and the way they interact with people is based in kindness, then everything else kind of falls out, right? And so that for me, making it simple, they don't necessarily understand. They might understand Indigenous history, but they don't have the emotional capacity to understand around generational disadvantage from stolen generation, or generational disadvantage of people living with a traumatic past or PTSD. But what
Mm.
they do understand, if you be kind to somebody,
Yeah.
then they'll be kind to you, and this is a nice way to live your life. And
Yeah.
that for me, distilling it down to that, has been really important. And they're pretty good kids, right? You know, they can be selfish as on occasion and those types of things, but I think in their heart of hearts, they're all three pretty kind young humans.
And you're bang on with the kindness. I think kindness is actually the key to pretty much humanity. If we could all focus on just being kind, and I know that that's simplistic, but if we could all just focus on being kind, I think that would have such a huge impact on not just the workplace, on, you know, home life, on workplace, on society, on our communities. You know, kindness is definitely the key to moving forward and being connected. I absolutely love that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what would be then for your up and coming, I know that you manage a team of leaders and quite a large team at the Australian Bureau of Stats, but what would be your 5 top tips for upcoming and emerging leaders?
Yeah, so this is, I love this. So cracking question, Ali.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so and I think these are tips. What I've loved as a leader is just having, you know, little quotes or little hooks in my head that just remind me that, oh no, remember this and apply how does this principle or how does this little hook apply in this situation? So I've brought some together in prep for this, and
good.
So the first one is that the equality you see in two people is not reflective of their struggle.
Oh,
right. So
this is good.
Yeah, thank you. This is one, and this is the Ricky story for me. So Ricky now is this is the Aboriginal man was working in my team that's living with disability. He is somebody that is doing really well. You know, he's got his own house. He lives independently. He's holding down and performing well on a permanent, really good job. And so people might say, well, he's fine. He's doing fine. We don't need to do anything for him. And that's not the case, right? He is fine and he's doing really well, but that's only because he's had the support and the resilience and the tenacity to do well and to overcome those challenges. And he'll continue to need that support to continue to do well. So for me, it's kind of, don't look at things at face value. Understand where they've come from is really important. I think that's a common mistake people can make, is particularly when it comes to Indigenous disadvantage, to go, well, you know, an Aboriginal person today is not disadvantaged like Aboriginal people born 100 years ago, but that's absolutely not true. They are subject to, you know, similar disadvantage. Well, actually subject to different disadvantages, but disadvantages all the same. So so
and
that's my
cultural and conditioning beliefs from childhood as well. It's
exactly. And this is the sort of thing that, you know, over time, and I would love to see this in my lifetime, is to see that those cultural disadvantages, those cultural biases don't exist anymore. So that's my first one, all right? I think that's one of a favorite of mine. The next one is, and I put up a LinkedIn post the other day about this, is be the first penguin. Right.
I saw that. I loved it. Yes. Explain that.
So this story came from, and I think I saw this at another talk, but it really stuck, was, you know, imagine thousands, hundreds of thousands sometimes, I think, with penguins standing on the iceberg. You know, I've done documentaries about this, and, you know, they're all wanting to dive into the water, but they're worried about the seal that might come and eat them, right? And none of them will dive into the water, but eventually one penguin dives in, and then the second one dives in, then the third, then they're all diving in, and it's a swarm of penguins in the ocean, right? And they got to where they need to get to. And for me, that's what culture change is about. And, you know, culture change doesn't happen until one person makes a change. You know, don't wait for policy to come out and say this is okay.
Take the plunge.
Take the plunge. Exactly. You know, don't wait for the training to come out. Don't wait for your boss to come out and say, we must all behave in this way. Just do it, right? You know, do what is right. Do what is kind. You know, be that change. Be that person that does something slightly differently. And then, you know, the next penguin might jump in and those types of things. So be the first penguin is
the first penguin. I feel like that could be on a mug. That's good. I like it.
Well, this story came from the reason why I posted it was I had this very similar conversation with a colleague, and she was really taken by that. And so she had a little badge made up for me that I could put on my lanyard. Yeah, it was really, really special. I know, it was a lovely moment. And I thought, no, I have to share this. So if she was impacted, let me brag about the fact she made me a little badge.
Yeah, for sure. I love it.
Yeah, thank you. So that was it. That's one I'm really a big fan of. So for me, another one is about diversity and inclusion is more than just people that are marginalized. So, you know, everyone's different, right? I might speak to 3 different women on gender disadvantage and get 3 totally different stories and experiences. Or I might speak to somebody like a white middle-aged man like myself and hear about their own struggles or their own background. So diversity is about everyone. You know, everyone is different. And, you know, something for me, you know, working in a large government institution and quite an analytical one, you know, I've heard over my career, you know, people not being the right fit for this organization, or they're a bit of a square peg in a round hole, right? Yeah, I see you putting your hand up there, Ali.
Yeah,
I mean,
guilty.
This is the thing. Yeah, this is the thing, right? You know, it's you hear about it, and for me, I really challenge that. And you know, the hook I have in my head here is, you know, when it comes to square peg in a round hole, I say change the hole.
Yeah.
So, you know, being a square peg in a round hole doesn't mean there's something wrong with the peg, right?
Yeah.
It means we should change the shape of the hole. And that for me practically means, you know, find a way to create or architect roles or responsibilities that suit somebody's strengths or preferences. Find a way to fit them into a team in a complementary way. Like, go out of your way to say, well, this is how this person prefers to work. And I think actually that will complement this other person really well, and be explicit about that. For me, you know, it comes back to, you know, extending the analogy, forcing a square peg into a round hole damages the peg and the hole. So,
I hadn't thought of it that way. That's good.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah, because, you know, if you force somebody to do something in a role or fit into a culture or fit into an environment that they're not comfortable, you know, they'll suffer from stress or anxiety. And that's it's personally damaging. But then the team sees that there's no acceptance here, and, you know, are they going to be comfortable being slightly different as well? So really important to change the whole. So that's a really big one.
And I'm a huge advocate as well for shining up people's strengths. You know, there was a common, you know, doing a SWOT analysis, which is like your strengths and weaknesses. And I think, you know what, you don't need to work on your weaknesses. Someone else's strengths are going to be your weaknesses. So let them do that and let them have their genius zone. And you just work on your strengths, because that is where your energy's at. That's what you're good at. And shine those things up, I reckon. Shine the strengths up, for sure.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with people wanting to work to their strengths. And, you know, in some cases, you know, I think we have to acknowledge that people not wanting to work on certain areas of their leadership or management, for example. So some people may be strong analytically and not that interested in supervising teams and that type of thing. That might be a barrier to pursuing certain career options, right? So let's be open about that, to say, well, you're not going to be head of our people management and wellbeing section. But that might be okay. They might go, sure, I don't want to do that job anyway. So there's totally fine for people to work to their strengths. I absolutely agree. And I do sometimes think, particularly in government or in large organizations, we get so focused on development that the focus becomes on weakness rather than on strength.
100%. Bang on. And what's your 5th one?
Yeah, so now this is quoting, I saved the best till last. This is quoting, and I hope I can do this on your podcast. This is quoting Harry Potter.
Of course you can.
Albus Dumbledore said that it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be. And I love that line. And, you know, this is all about Harry Potter having the most, you know, awkward and horrible of upbringings, you know, as an orphan, you know, living in a horrible household, being bullied his whole life, being different, you know, coming to Hogwarts and, you know, being pointed at. But he grows, to be this wonderful young man who does lots of wonderful things. And Dumbledore's principle was, well, he's going to provide the environment and the support that Harry needs to grow into this wonderful young man. And that for me represents, growth and diversity and inclusion, and beats anything any of our philosophers said hundreds or thousands of years ago, right? It really encapsulates for me, everyone's born as they are, and it's the onus is on the people around them to let them become their best person.
Yeah, create the environment that can nurture for them to grow into who they want to be. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I love
100%,
it.
100%.
Well, amazing. Thank you so much for all your time today. Justin, this has been an awesome discussion around inclusion and diversity, and I love your insight. So if anyone is looking to, I guess, connect with you or get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Oh, look, LinkedIn is the best way. So look me up on LinkedIn. So Justin Lockhorst, Lokhorst. You should be able to find me that way. Always happy to connect. If I've said something that you want to challenge or add to, please get in touch. I'm always happy to shoot the breeze on this stuff.
Awesome. I loved it. Loved riffing with you today, Justin. If you wanted to get any more information about this episode or the show notes, you can go to madeformore.com.au/09. Thanks again, Justin. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks, Ali. You're a legend.